Okay, guys, today we want to talk about segment bisectors. And the first thing we want to talk about is a few definitions. In our definitions, we need to know what a midpoint is. A midpoint of a segment is, let's draw a segment. Hang on. Okay, let's draw a segment. It has two endpoints, A and B. And then the midpoint of that segment is going to be the point that is in the center. And a lot of times you'll see they call that M. Okay, so that would be a midpoint, which makes both, see, it makes two congruent segments. So it makes those two segments congruent. So if you talk about a segment, this is a segment, if you talk about a segment bisector, that means you've got a segment, and it can either be bisected or cut in two by a segment, a ray, a line, or a plane. So it could be another segment that cuts it in two. It could be a segment that is cut in two by a line, or it could be a segment that is cut in two by a ray. Okay? All right, or a plane, and I'm not going to draw that one, but I just wanted you to see it cuts. I just wanted you to know that it cuts the segment, whatever it is, whether it's a line, a segment, or a ray, it cuts it into two congruent parts. Okay, so now that we have that concept, let's move on down and do an example. All right, let's look at an example one. If I have this segment, A, B, and I'm going to put M in the middle, and I tell you that M is the midpoint of AB, then you know that AM and MB are equal to each other. You know that AM is equal to MB. Okay? So if I tell you that this whole thing, this whole segment, sorry, I shouldn't say thing, but this whole segment AB is equal to 26, then can you tell me what the measurements of AM and MB would be equal to? Okay, so basically it looks like M is cutting it into two equal parts, right? So at M it's cutting it into two equal parts. So you take 26 and you would cut it into two equal parts. So to cut something into two equal parts, you divide by 2. So both of these would be 26 divided by 2, which would be 13. Okay, all right. Let's look at example 2. All right, here's another segment. Your segment is RS, and you've got P in the middle. So you know these two segments are equal. And it says P is the midpoint of RS, and find PS and RS. So they want us to find PS and RS. Those are the two things we want to find. PS and RS. Okay? They also told us this. They told us that RP is 7. So if RP is 7, what do we know about PS? You're right, we know that it's 7. So we know that PS is 7. And now that we know each part, we can add them together and come up with RS. So RS is going to be 14. Okay, seems pretty simple. Well, here's a couple of examples for you to try. This is to check your understanding, okay? Check example 1. So here's a segment. We're going to say that it's D, E, F, and it is where E is the midpoint, so those two segments are equal, and the whole thing is 18. So I want you to tell me what DE is and what EF is equal to. Okay? And then check your understanding. Example 2, your segment is MP, and we're going to put N in the middle this time. And we know that they're both equal, and we know that MN is 11. So I want you to tell me what NP is equal to, and I also want you to tell me what MP is equal to. Okay, so you should have gotten 18 divided by 2 will give you 9, and then 18 divided by 2 will give you 9, because you break 18 into 2 equal parts. That's the whole point of having a midpoint, E. Okay, on this one, example 2, you were given one section's 11, so of course the other section's 11 because they're equal, and then 11 plus 11 would give you 22. Okay, so let's slide on down for another example. All right, example 3 says this. If you've got the line segment A, B, and the midpoint is M, and that midpoint is cut by a line, because remember, it could be a line, a segment, or it doesn't just have to be a point. It could be a line or a segment or a ray that cuts through. And of course, if it's the midpoint, we know that those two segments are equal. If this one is 5x and this one is 35, you've already told me that AM is equal to MB. Therefore, we can use this same little formula and fill in. Since we know AM is 5x and MB is 35, we fill those in where they're equal to each other. It forms an equation, and then we can solve it. So x is equal to 7. Okay? All right. So here's an example 3 checkpoint for you. I want you to pause for just a few minutes and see if you can work this one. Okay, did you get 6 as your answer? Good. All right, let's move on down. And we want to talk about the midpoint formula. Okay, the midpoint formula, we're talking about the midpoint of a line when we use coordinates. So our midpoint formula is this. It says if you have 2 points, remember, x1, y1, and x2, y2. Because every point has an x and a y number. So since this is the first point, we call that x1, y1, and since this is the second point, we call that the second x and the second y. So you say x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So you basically average the x's and you average the y's. All right. Here is an example. Example 4. Example 4 says, A part says if you have 0.12 and you have 0.74, then what would be the midpoint of these two, between these 2 points? Okay, so if you could plot these on a piece of graph paper and you could connect them, you're looking for the point that's in the middle of these 2 points. Okay, so you can do that by using this formula. So we're going to call this x1 and this y1, and this x2 and this y2. All right, so here's the formula. We want to fill this in. We know that it's divided by 2. We add our x's, so 1 plus 7, and we add our y's, 2 plus 4, and that's going to be 1 plus 7 is 6 over 2, and 2 plus 4 is 6 over 2. I'm sorry, y'all have to correct me. That is 8 over 2. So the midpoint between these 2 points is going to be 0.43. Okay? So in class, what I'd like to do is graph this and show you that that is the midpoint. All right? Here's an example for you to do. I want you to try -2, 3, and 5. Sorry, that's messy. -1. Pause and do that. Okay, so your final answer here should be 3 over 2, which we can leave that. Don't change it to 1/2. 3 over 2 is good, and 1. And that is the lesson.